an emerging economy. Africa is an emerging, and it is a continent that the whole world is focusing. And all the focus of activities within and outside are on the ground, land. So it is with these activities that the impact and the usefulness and the challenges of land rights and land use became prominent. So all we need to do is to be encouraged country by country in relating in order to adopt best practices and produce our land policy.
The land policy initiative in Africa is critical at this time because the question of land unites Africa, at the same time divides Africa. In this sense that there's a lot of space now for need for land in Africa in terms of the resources that are to be captured, space for farming of agricultural land, and then also need to address certain aspects like women land rights in Africa. So the policy captures some of those initiatives.
I think land policy is something that has been worked on for a long time as well. But I think it's a difficult issue. Land touches on economics, it touches on our social and cultural life, it touches on our politics. So it's a sensitive issue, it's a difficult issue, and so not an easy one to resolve. And maybe sometimes it falls through the cracks. We have people looking at agriculture who focus on production. We have people who look at the wider economy and focus on macroeconomic issues, and maybe land doesn't always get the attention. But as I said, I think it's because it's also a difficult issue.
The African continent has different boundaries, different forms of natural resources from the various countries. However, the land policy initiative at the African Union levels gives us a template as African countries from which to begin to individually address our issues in an African context. For instance, some of the issues being prioritized are once more the management of the natural resources and how vulnerable groups can be able to benefit from policies at various levels. And also remember that, yes, we have boundaries that mark different countries in Africa, but at the same time we have resources that unite us. For instance, the River Nile. The source of the Nile is in Uganda, the Egyptians are using it, and it's all passing through various levels of land. Also, we have various forests and various natural resources that transcend boundaries. We have, for instance, Lake Victoria that is serving three African countries. So yes, the question of land at times is a continental question, but at times it needs to be taken back to the country level.
There were principles on large-scale land-based investment, guiding principles on large-scale land-based investment were launched here a couple of days ago as part of this conference. These were developed by the AU Land Policy Initiative. They were adopted by ministers gathered earlier this year. So that's also a response to the challenge of policy response. Again, we have to make that response real in the actions of our member states, in the actions even of local leaders across Africa. But it's an acknowledgement that things weren't all going right, and it's a guidance to try and ensure that if we do have investment in agriculture, in land, that it's going to work better for Africa and Africa's people. I mean, what we've seen already over the last years is that these large land deals are not delivering. They're not delivering even economically. They're certainly not delivering for the poorest in Africa. They're not delivering for the local farmers. So I think many of us have seen in government as well as in civil society and academics doing research on this, that they're not delivering. And that's why there's been a review of how do we manage this.
Beginning to look at the question of resources and land and large-scale investments in terms of how, one, it prioritizes the needs of the people, and secondly, how particularly indigenous communities and vulnerable groups benefit from those investments. And then lastly, when you hear an investment like we are going to grow maize, is it really about growing maize for the people, or is it about an investment that is going to fuel energy, clean energy in another country elsewhere? So how do people begin to engage with some of those aspects, and how do they benefit from that is important.
Many of these big policy documents that are developed, they have to be broken down for people that are affected to actually know what the policies are doing, and then to have increased awareness at the community level.
I I think in this conference it's been good to see that there's greater momentum around really getting our land governance and land policy right in Africa. I think there has been progress over the last decades. Of course, it's a slow progress, it's difficult, but I think this conference has shown that there is that energy and interest among civil society, government leaders, even some business leaders, leaders within the AU system, that there is greater momentum behind making land governance work in Africa.
This is a groundbreaking conference. As the topic bespeaks, this is the inaugural conference on land policy in Africa. To be specific, from where I come, Liberia, this is the first time that we have developed a land policy. And this conference offers me the platform to get views of other practitioners in the sector or other countries that are going through the process of developing their policies, to learn from them the type of processes that they have adopted in terms of coming up with their policies.
The African continent, we have a meeting of this kind, and we come together as a continent to share experiences, is a very huge leap in African countries beginning to think together. Secondly, in creating commonalities about issues like investment. That's a very important step that a meeting like this creates. And then lastly, remember that individual African countries have various visions. How will those visions be attained if the land question is not put into that particular context? And this gives us that platform upon which we can begin once more to address specific issues that affect individual African countries and at the same time are attended to at the Pan-African level.
In terms of representation in this conference, I think we do have some farmer groups who are here and who are represented, so we've got quite a wide range of people. Definitely I've met some farmers here, and so their voice is being heard to some extent here. In terms of the large land deals and what we've been talking about as land grabs, there has been a wide range of responses. There have been protests about land grabs, from the local sort of protests when people have lost land. There have been policy interventions, as I mentioned, even within the AU system, discussions on what should be the guiding principles for large-scale land-based investments. There have been discussions in national parliaments, and we also have in this conference members of parliaments from a number of countries and members of the Pan-African Parliament. So I think there are a range of voices being heard, and I think that we're working together to try and find some solutions.
The cross-fertilization of ideas from the various African countries is quite important, and it will go a long way in harmonizing to some extent the various land policies of Africa.
This conference is newsworthy. All of a sudden, institutions interested in Africa's policy issues are starting a conference specifically based on land policy on the continent. I think it came a bit too late, but it's better late than never. We should have been discussing land policy issues in Africa long ago, but it's not too, it's better now that at least we have started something, talking about it. So it's a very, very important conference. It's newsworthy, and we are covering it. We are writing about the topical issues. We are talking about the interesting issues that are coming up. The revelations, the findings of the researchers are all interesting points, and we are covering them. So it's newsworthy.